There are so many sensitive snowflakes on social media who will complain about every little thing in entertainment, and of course, there are so many creatives who are afraid of cancellation that they add the dumbest disclaimers possible, and now there's a new slew of disclaimers and trigger warnings being added to games like the new Life is Strange and also Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. I have a few different things to show off, but before I get into the topic, if you enjoy the content I create, check out the links in the description, join the community in my live streams, and consider supporting through Patreon or YouTube memberships. Now, when I talk about ridiculous disclaimers, I'm not talking about like sensitivity warnings for like epilepsy, right? I'm not talking about warnings and disclaimers that could affect somebody's health, that if somebody has a certain, physical ailment, that they should not consume content because of things like bright flashing lights. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about, ooh, the imagery in this game might bother you. It might really trigger your delicate sensibilities, like what we're seeing happening in a slew of new games. So starting off with this, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle will feature this brand new disclaimer clarifying that Nazis are bad. For most people, it's understood that when a creator chooses to depict something evil in a piece of fiction, especially when that something is also portrayed in universe as explicitly bad, said creator is not endorsing a given behavior or ideology, but rather using it for narrative purposes, often to draw parallels between their protagonist and their opposition. I don't think that this is really that hard of a concept to understand, but apparently it is. Machine Games wants to treat you like you're stupid because the same apparently does not ring true for the video game industry's modern audience, as like many games before it, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle will feature a very performative disclaimer assuring players that despite developer Machine Games' decision to pit the iconic archaeologist against the historical Nazi regime, the studio themselves does not endorse it in any way, shape, or form. Reasonable and normal people agree the Nazis were bad guys. Are there really so many people that are insensitive or uneducated that they don't know who or what the Nazis were and why they were bad? If you are old enough or smart enough to play this game, a disclaimer like this doesn't mean anything to you. It's just a company holding your hand yet again. This is something that we have seen happening so many times over the past couple of years, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. I personally think that it's ridiculous to have a company holding your hand like this, because ultimately we shouldn't need a disclaimer for every bad guy, for every little thing that could upset someone. And when it comes to video games, of course, that's what ESRB ratings are for. If you go to an ESRB webpage, it will tell you what type of content or theme is in a title. Now, there is not an ESRB page up quite yet for the Great Circle, which has led a lot of people to think that maybe they wanted to try to get this at a T for teen rating, but I just don't see that happening given the violent nature, the depictions of weapons. We know that they're swearing. There's the Nazi imagery in this. I don't think that that's going to happen, but when the page goes up for it, it is certainly going to tell you that this content is in the game. That happens with any title. I mean, just look at Wolfenstein, for example. Look at the rating summary over on the ESRB webpage. It talks about how, there is an alternate historical reality involving Nazis. You use pistols and shotguns. There's blood splatter. There's soldiers. There's mechanized troops. I mean, it tells you everything that is in this game that somebody may find to be offensive, that they may find bothersome. that they might want a little bit of an extra warning for, right? We have the ESRB for a freaking reason. And of course, this actually ties into another situation that we had just heard about, where Life is Strange double exposure actually has an option to enable a transphobia warning. If enabled, warnings will appear on the top right hand side of the screen before the content appears. So we're not even just talking about a warning when you're booting up the game. We're talking about right before that event happens within the game. You can have all of these different warnings popping up. You've got brightness, blood, violence, suicide, abuse, drugs, sex, transphobic content. I mean, this does ruin art. I had actually talked about this when it happened, but Ian McKellen and also Ralph Fiennes have talked about this in the past, where they're calling for limited trigger warnings in theaters because part of art is dealing with these intense themes, sometimes being scared, being shocked, being happy, just going through human emotions. Why else would you go and buy a video game or go to a theater or anything like that if you do not want to genuinely feel something? And if you're having somebody hold your hand and they're telling you, oh, by the way, in the next 30 seconds, there's going to be a suicide, it's just not that impactful. And art is supposed to be impactful. I mean, Ian McKellen, of course, I'm gonna agree with the GOAT Gandalf, but he said outside theaters and in the lobbies, including this one, the audience is warned there's a loud noise, and at one point there are flashing lights. There's references to smoking. I think it's ludicrous myself. Yes, absolutely. I quite like to be surprised by loud noises and outrageous behavior on stage, which again is why you are going to the theater, which is why you are playing these video games, is to go through the motion yourself, to feel these emotions because of this depiction on screen. Ralph Fiennes also said something similar. We didn't used to have trigger warnings. I mean, they are, talking about very disturbing scenes like in Macbeth, terrible murders and things. But I think the impact of theater should be that you're shocked and you should be disturbed. I don't think you should be prepared for these things. And when I was young, we never had trigger warnings for shows. Yeah, I mean, shows, movies, the theater, video games. We're talking about in all forms of entertainment now. And with something like Life is Strange double exposure, they're even taking it a step farther because they're telling you within a certain period of time, oh, this depiction is going to happen on screen. There's going to be transphobia or there's going to be a suicide. Like, that just takes you out of the entertainment element entirely. So I can't say I'm particularly shocked because developers are so afraid of cancellation these days, and they want to make sure that, of course, they're not having to deal with anybody accusing them of condoning this type of, ideology or glorifying or endorsing this ideology, which is absurd because, again, I think that most normal people, if you're old enough or smart enough to play this game, a disclaimer like this doesn't do any good for you. But that's all that I really had to discuss in this video. Let everyone know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this, give it a like, and if you didn't, give it a dislike. I appreciate your support either way, but I'll talk to you all again in the next video really soon.